All right. Name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So this is a talk I gave in New York. So there's a conference there, as you can see, like a few weeks ago. And the idea is, how do Orthodox Christians approach contemporary issues? Okay. And the reason I want to create talk about this is we need to create like a framework on how to think about these things, because what's happening is we have a lot of topics that come up. And then people say, things that aren't very Christian, like, is this wrong or right? That's not a Christian question, right? That's like a Islamic question or a Jewish question, right? Christianity doesn't do, is this wrong? Is this right? Can I do this? Can I not do this? It's very rules-based, right? So, and if you think about rules-based religion, right? If a religion is rules-based, which means I do the good things, I go to heaven, I do the bad things, then I don't go to heaven, right? Then what does that mean? That means who's saving me? I'm saving me, right? Because I did the things, right? Jesus didn't save me, I saved me, because I did the things on the good list and you did the things on the bad list. And that also allows me to judge you, right? Because since I did the good things on the good list and you did the things on the bad list, that means I'm better than you, right? And so now I can easily evaluate, judge you, mock you, hate you, scoff at you, and all these things. Then when you go to hell, I go, yeah, they should go to hell because they didn't do the things on the list like I did, right? So we don't want to think about things in terms of, is this okay? Is this right or wrong? Can I do this or not? That's like a 5-year-old who talks to their parents. Like, am I allowed to drink soda, right? But when you're 20, it's not, am I allowed to drink soda? It's like, you can drink soda, it gives you diabetes and cancer, and it's not good for you, but you can drink it. You can do whatever you want, right? I just wouldn't drink a lot of it, and I wouldn't drink it at this time, and maybe I drink it like this. But there's no, am I allowed to drink soda? You're 20 years old. Make up your mind. You tell me. Right? So we have to think about issues that way. Are these people bad? Are these people good? Is this wrong? Is this right? It's too simplistic. Yes?
It might be a semantic thing because I understand that what you're saying in terms of a good list and a bad list. But it's also important to practice that there's discernment and there is a moral ground of good thing. Or there is good and there is bad, right and wrong. So it would be wrong still to make the decision of, I should drink soda because I will get diabetes and all these things. But you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not going to get into that discussion, but is there truth? Yes, there is truth, right? And there is falsehood. And these usually apply to more spiritual principles, right? And, I will say that most of you are fed falsehood, right? Most of the things that you get through social media, different posts, depending on who you follow, a lot of times you listen to this stuff and you're like, this is just wrong. This just doesn't even add up. It doesn't even make sense. And whoever said this has no experience in life, right? Because whoever said this is, 16 or 19 or 20 and has never actually gone through anything. You can tell, right? Because of what they just said. But anyway, so I concede the point. So the way I think we should think about these things is 3 ways: biblically, traditionally, and apolitically, okay? And how to approach these issues. Now, before you get too bored, let's talk about what these things mean, right? First approach is biblically. And when most people say biblically, they mean things like this, right? This is Noah's Ark and the flood. This is God killing 70,000 people. This is Sodom and Gomorrah raising, putting hell on earth and just fire and brimstone coming down. These are more people dying. I think Noah's Ark as well, right? And so people love this stuff, right? People love, it's all about, let me find the Old Testament and let me find what God says about these people and how they're going to perish and how they're going to burn. And people love to quote the Old Testament, okay? And unfortunately, we have to think a little bit about the Old Testament, right? And we have to be careful before we quote it, because it isn't meant to be quoted like that, right? It's meant to be predictive of the life of Christ, right? It's supposed to teach us about who God is, right? And not a way for me to judge my own morality, right? Because there's a lot of stuff like I'm not supposed to talk to the sinful people, and the righteous people of God should have no place with the sinful people of whatever. And God was trying to set his people apart, right, for a particular reason. Now that Jesus has come, a lot of those things don't apply the same way, right? And so we can't just start quoting them without thinking, right? And, doesn't it biblically just mean I'm rooted in Christ, right? And so it's actually very simple, right? Because every time you come across something in the Old Testament and you're confused, you don't have to figure it out, right? You don't have to go through massive commentaries and look at the life of Jesus, right? Because isn't Jesus, his life is the personification of everything in the Old Testament, right? So it actually gets very simple, right? So if I'm wondering, how should I interact with sinners? Okay, what did Jesus do? There it is. That's the answer, right? And so the answer is usually that simple, right? When you don't understand, something in the Old Testament. So St. Cyril says, just as by melting two candles together, you get one piece of wax, so I think one who receives the flesh and blood of Jesus is fused together with him by communion, and the soul finds that he is Christ and Christ is in him, right? So the idea of being a Christian isn't just I follow this guy because he had really good principles, right? This could be something like, like Gandhi, right? A lot of people will follow Gandhi's teachings, right? Or the Dalai Lama, right? And that's just the teachings of a righteous, moral man, right? Who has a lot of wisdom. Christ isn't like that. He wasn't just a man who taught us about principles that are really good idea to follow, right? He said, no, I am the way and the truth and life. I mean, it isn't, I will show you the way. I will show you the path. No, I am the path, right? So we, in the Eucharist, we're actually in him and he's in us. So our life with Christ isn't about following the stuff he said. It's about being in him, right? And all of that flows, right, naturally. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So this process of getting to root yourself in him, right? And what does this actually look on a day-to-day basis? How do I make these decisions, right? As I come across all the situations in the world, all the people I interact with, how do I respond to this person? She said this, how do I respond back? He did this person did this to me, right? And we come across these situations all the time, right? And a lot of times it's very confusing, and it's not limited to people your age, right? A lot of times people my age are very confused, right? We all get calls all the time, like, this happened, what do I do, right? And really, the answer, I think that it's very simple, that we should all just kind of, tattoo on our foreheads, right, is what would Jesus do, right? And often that's just the answer, right? Those little yellow bracelets, WWJD. Really, this solves most problems in most churches, right? Just we can hand them out to all the servants, all the clergy, and just say, you should look at these, right? Because what you're doing is not this, right? And you just kind of look, yeah, I forgot, right? So I highly recommend this just kind of be your guiding principle, right? And the way we do this is two ways, right? We kind of read about him, and then we become a part of him, and he becomes a part of us, right? And if he's really my father, right, then you often, and you guys have all reached the age now where you find yourself, right, heaven forbid, channeling your mother and your father, right? All of a sudden you say something and you're like, crap, that's something my dad says, right? Crap, that's something my mom says. I swore I'd never be like her. I'd never be like her. And there you are. Now you're like her. And guess what? In 10 more years, you're going to be more like her. Sorry, right? So if he's my dad, then the same process happens, right? All of a sudden, hey, oh my God, I just said something that Jesus would have said. I just acted something the way Jesus would have acted, right? And next thing you know, I'm starting to talk like him and act like him and think like him and love like him, right? That's the process of becoming a Christian. That's what that means, right? And one of the things we lose in the church sometimes is we sort of lose focus about Christianity, and we're so focused on the rules and the rituals. Is this right? Is this wrong? Can I do this? Can I not do this? Is this haram and halal? And haram and halal, these are Muslim words, right? And a lot of the stuff we do in our church, Muslim, right? Not from the church, right? But a lot of the influence we have from our parents, they're raised in Muslim cultures, they're going to act Muslim, right? So what Elder Porphyrio says is, you mustn't wage your Christian struggle with sermons and arguments, but with true, secret love. When we argue, others react. When we love people, they are moved and we win them over. When we love, we think that we offer something to others, but in reality, we are the first to benefit. I mean, like honestly, like take a picture of this quote, and for the next 50 years, you will realize the truth of this quote at different levels of your life, right? And you will rediscover that this quote is the truthiest thing you've ever heard in your life. That's a word. I just didn't make that up, right? So all of these points are so important, right? Because we like to win people over by hitting them over the head. We throw verses at them. So when I said we need to approach problems biblically, you all thought, okay, let's throw verses at people, right? And that's weaponizing the Bible. I don't think that's the appropriate use of the Bible, right? To take verses and just say, you know what it says? You know what it says here? Oh yeah, you know what it says there? Yeah. What are we doing, right? That's not the way Jesus did anything, right? He won people over by simply loving them, seeing them, right? Interacting with them as people, giving them the respect and dignity of a human being. Right? This is how we do it. Right? And then he says, when we love people, they are moved and we win them over. When we love, and this is the most important part, we think that we offer something, but we're the first to benefit, right? And I'm sure many of you now have reached the point in your life where you've done something for somebody. I hope at some point you've done something for somebody. And you realize, hey, you know, that felt kind of good. And that was very fulfilling. And yeah, I didn't sleep all night. And yeah, I'm very tired the next day. And yeah, my back hurts. But you know what? That was a good thing. And I'm happy I did that. And there's a joy in suffering. All right, I'll say that again. There's a joy in suffering. In fact, many people will tell you the only joy you'll ever find is in suffering. Right? And especially when you're suffering for another person. Right? That's the happiest you'll ever be. Right? So when I tell you, let's approach problems biblically, right? We approach problems by, yeah, you guys are stuck. You got to come to the front. There's just no, these are all the STEM seats here, so that's what we decided. It is kind of mean that you guys took the back seats and made people walk to the front. I mean, it's kind of lame. I'm not going to lie. I'm kidding. All right. So handling contemporary issues biblically happens when we constantly think about him. What do we say? What would he respond? How would he react? Right? And like I just said, that is not the same as throwing verses at people in an effort to condemn them. Right? And so I want you to compare the quote that I just gave you from Elder Porphyrios, right, this beautiful quote, to something I found on the internet. WWJD. Who will Jesus destroy? Look at this. It's horrible, right? Yeah, it's just Google idiot things, and then that'll come up, right? So look what this person's doing. This person is so full of hate. He's basically like, who will Jesus destroy? And he went through all the Bible and found all the ways God's going to get him. And I look at this list, I'm like 5 of these things, right? At least. Okay? Stop. So, remember we talking about recording and inappropriate? You guys missed out. That was on you. You wanted the recording. It's fantastic, right? So, this is not the way we use the Bible, right? We don't use it as a weapon against our fellow man.
Sorcerers, druggies are the same.
I don't. I tried not. You're reading it much more than I did. I saw it and got pissed off, clipped it into my slides, and said, "Gosh, what's wrong with these people?" Right? But there's, huh?
Of course, that's what we did.
Right. But so what I want to point out here, right, is what is the message of the gospel, right? And the message of the gospel is not a list of don'ts, right? It's a list of be, right? And Christ says, "I am," right? And that's what we're called to be, like him, and see him, right? And live him in our lives. So that's the first thing we need to do, is to approach things biblically, right? And hopefully you know what that means now is not, let's try to find the verses that attack the other position and then throw them at another human being, right? You're just going to tap her head? Really? Okay.
No, I texted it to Noah.
I texted it to Noah and said, I guess you're out of luck.
That's good. That's appropriate, actually. Noah is most of those things, actually. He's all of them. All right. So the next question is let's approach things traditionally, okay? Now, once again, you think you know what I'm about to say, right? When we say traditionally, and as you can guess, I don't really, not saying the things that you're guessing, right? So the important thing to understand here is that we are inextricably linked to two different religions, right? The first one is Judaism, right? Because that's Judeo-Christianity, right? That's where we came from, right? And the second one is Islam, right? Because we spent 1,500 years in a Muslim country being dominated, oppressed, suppressed, and intermingled with Muslims on a daily basis, right? You know, so these are our people, right? So we have to start thinking about this, right? Because what happens is when we switch cultures from one culture to the next, right? All of a sudden the things that everybody agrees on in the culture that you just came from, you know, and including the Christians, right? And they're like, yeah, well, obviously, you know, it's haram to have a ship upside down, right? Anyone heard this, ship upside down?
What?
Yeah, see, some of you are nodding. So I grew up in a house where the ship upside down is haram. God's very upset about that. Yeah, that's a thing.
Is it the same as putting your leg on top of each other?
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing. That's also haram, right? So I'll just do that now since that's also cultural, right? Yeah, put upside down and then, you know, point at the sky, right? So we have to be careful that as we approach Christianity, especially in the United States, right, that we think about what's really Christian versus what's cultural, right? And we have to sort through those two different things because they're not the same thing. And the most dangerous thing we can do, right, if you want to say, hey, it's our culture to eat ul-as and the ghitas, okay? Which is just a fun word to say, you know? That's the only time you get to cuss, right, in front of your parents. Ul-as, right? Am I the only one that did this? Right, so, you know, that's a great cultural thing, and that's when ul-as comes out of the ground, and it happens to be around the Feast of Theophany, so we're like, okay, eat ul-as and ghitas, you know, that's nice, right? But that's very different than saying, you know, that's what God wants, right? And that's our religion, right? It's not, right? It's simply a cultural application of our religion. Does that make sense? And that could easily be replaced by, I don't know, Applebee's in the Theophany, right? I mean, you know, whatever American tradition will replace it is fine, right? It doesn't matter what food is there. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So I want to get into this idea of tradition versus imitation, right? And these are two different words. And unfortunately, oftentimes, we're taught that they're the same word, right? To be traditional means I imitate. I did what they did in the past. Right? But they're not. They're two different words, and I want to focus on what's the difference between these words, especially in the church, right? So the tradition of the church, and I'm talking about the holy tradition of the church, evolved as a way to safeguard, right, our dogmas and our faith against, basically heretics, right? When someone challenged the faith of the church and said there's no Trinity, we said, oh, no, wait a minute, there's a Trinity. Right? And we preserve these things using dogmas, and we say, you know, now that we've discussed this and we have a dogma that says there's a Trinity, we're not going to deviate from that, right? Because truth doesn't change, right? If God was a Trinity 1,000 years ago, he's probably still a Trinity now, right? However, the church has adapted many times throughout the history of the church, right? And has changed things it's done, not dogmas, right? But the way it applies the dogmas many, many times in the history of the church, right? And it does so by creating more ever complicated dogmas and calendars and rituals, right? To kind of continue to adapt to new things that would evolve, right? So I'll give you an example. You know, in the early church, right? You guys remember that after the year 70 AD, right? Nero burned down Rome, right? And so Christians were persecuted. And they were persecuted until the year 313 AD. So for those first 250 years, Christians, if you said, I'm a Christian, they're like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to kill you, right? So anyone shows up to the church and said, I want to be a Christian, you know, the bishop, there weren't many priests back then, bishop would be like, are you sure? Because you know they're probably going to kill you, right? And they're probably going to kill me. And yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to die. So all right, let's baptize this guy, right? He's into it, okay? What happened after 313 AD? Constantine became the emperor. He became a Christian, and he issued this Edict of Tolerance, Edict of Milan, and said that Christianity was one of the state religions, right? And he became a Christian. So now everybody who was anybody who wanted to get power or whatever, get promoted, became a Christian. So everyone and their mother became a Christian, right, in the Roman Empire. So what happens is everyone starts showing up, say, I'm a Christian. And you're like, so what do you know about Jesus? Well, I know that, and he starts talking about pagan gods and Roman gods and whatever else. And you're like, okay, you don't know anything about Christianity. Yeah, but I want to be Christian. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to invent a new thing. We're going to call them catechumens. Anyone heard this word? Right? A catechumen was this concoction that the church came up with and said, now that all these people are trying to join, if you want to join, we're going to call you a catechumen. We're not going to baptize you. We're going to make you learn for 3 years, and then we'll baptize you. Right? It's just a new invention of the church. Is that okay? Are we allowed to do that? Yeah, of course, right? Something changed on the ground, and the church just adapted to the situation. Makes perfect sense, right? And this is tradition, right? This is the tradition we come from. The church is actually very adaptive, very creative, very nimble, right? And constantly adapts to different situations in history, wars, governors, politicians, whatever the case may be. Okay. So some conditions of sacred tradition are they can't contradict the Bible, they can't contradict prior tradition, and they have to be accepted by the council, right? So tradition has some qualifications before we can call it that, right? And it's a big deal. And these are some examples of tradition in the church, right? Making Sunday the holy day. This was something that, nowhere in the Bible say make Sunday the holy day. It's all about the Sabbath, right? But the early Christians said, let's make it Sunday. Facing east, that's not in the Bible. Ceremony of marriage, not in the Bible. Ceremony of funerals, not in the Bible. Making the sign of the cross, triple immersion of baptism, the prayers of the Agbeya, fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays. All these things are very, very old things, but they're tradition things. They're innovations that the church did not from the Bible, but through the living experience of the tradition. And they came at different times in the history of the church. Okay?
Marchie?
Yeah.
Even though these things aren't directly from the Bible, wouldn't you say that, it's... those things wouldn't be seen as,
Less,
right?
Yes. In fact, so this is a very good question, right? So sometimes we create a false dichotomy and say, now, is this from the Bible or is this just tradition? Right? And use the word just. Okay. It's Protestants, worst people, right? And they love Jesus, they're horrible, right? So
He's joking.
I'm joking.
For those who don't know him,
For those who are on the record, he's joking. So then, so this is kind of a false dichotomy, right? Because if you think about the Bible, right, how do we know that the Bible's the Bible, right? So who told us that the books, the 39 books of the Old Testament and 27 books of the New Testament, that's sacred scripture? Who said that?
The Council of Constantinople.
No. Close, though, right? I'll give you a broader answer. The tradition. The church did, right? Who decided it? The first canon we have is written by St. Athanasius, and it lists all the Gospels, right? And all the books of the Bible, and say, these are sacred scripture, right? So when someone who's Protestant says to you, hey, I only follow what's in the Bible, you have to kind of say, well, how do you know that's the Bible? Who told you that's the Bible? Right? The church told you that's the Bible. And it's the same church that said you should make the sign of the cross. And it's the same church that said you should face east. So the Bible is actually one of the things on here. The Bible is an outcome of tradition. Make sense? I mean, the Bible didn't get solidified till the 4th century. Right? It's something that tradition created. So
God through them, not just people saying.
No, of course, right? And this is the guidance of the Holy Spirit, right? So we don't even want to we don't want to say something is more or less if it's Bible or tradition or not. Those two hold the same weight in the church, right? Because they're all from the same source, right? The living experience of people who are living in Christ, right? And that's what creates all of this stuff, right? Okay, good question. So then the question is this apostolic tradition that we just talked about, all these fancy things, right? Is this living or dead? Right? Is it stagnant? Is it locked in the 4th century? Does it change? Does it adapt? Is it alive? Right? And my contention is tradition is alive. It's not dead, right? And the church is alive. It's not dead. right? And simply reducing the church and saying, well, we're going to imitate what our fathers did, and if it's old, we're going to do it, is not consistent with the life and the tradition of the true apostolic church. Right? That's not how Christians thought back then. It's unfortunately how a lot of people talk now, but what they're saying is new. No one ever talked like that before, right? You can't find writings of the early centuries where people say, we will do whatever they did in the past. No patristic father ever said anything like that. That's uncle, right, at church. So there's a great book on this topic by an eminent scholar, John Meyendorff, and he named the book Living Tradition, which I just love the name of this book. So I want to read you some quotes from this. He says, the term traditional theology can also denote a dead theology if it means identifying traditionalism with simple repetition. Right? So once we take tradition and we make it simple repetition, it is a dead tradition. Right? Because tradition is meant to be adaptive to the world in which we live. Right? I'm going to give you another example. Just like 2 weeks ago, if you guys remember, we read the parable of the sower. Right? And then what we do? We read the parable of the sower again. And you're like, why? Well, because in Egypt, this is the time when we sow seeds. I mean, so just think about that for a second, right? The church, built the whole readings and structure of the calendar around the fact that the farmers were out sowing seeds. And they're like, you guys are sowing seeds? You still sowing seeds? We'll read it again. And we'll talk about the sower again, since you're all sowing seeds. Is that nice? Right? See how adaptive the church is? Is that what you guys are doing? Sure. We'll read it. We'll talk about sowing seeds, since you're all sowing seeds. Right? It's a nice way that the church kind of comes to the level of the people and adapts. Now the question is, we're not sowing seeds anymore right now. Now what? I'll let you guys figure that out. I'll be dead by that point. Okay. So I'll give you an example. The case of Stasite Metavovotheo. You guys know Stasite Metavovotheo? So Deacon says, Stasite Metavovotheo Kosumento Agio Evangelio. Right? You guys know this?
Yes.
Okay. Just a show of hands without saying anything out loud. How many people know what that means?
Yeah,
Oh,
the
okay.
fear of God and this.
I said so without speaking, with show of hands,
Oh, sorry.
monkey. Right? So, okay, so it's okay. I'm not saying you're a bad person or you're going to hell. I'm just saying monkey. All right. So one time, I'll tell you guys a story. One time, a power deacon came to our church, and I asked him to do the litany of the gospel. And so he did the litany of the gospel, and when he got to Stasite, he didn't know it in English, so he said, Stasite Metavovotheo. And I said, okay, So then he comes up to me afterwards. He goes, sorry, I didn't know it in English. I said, no problem. We don't shoot people here. It's fine. And I said, so what does Stasite mean? He goes, I don't know. And I said, so why do you have that look on your face? And he goes, what look on my face? The Stasite, and you're pissed off, you're holding the cross, and you're why do you have that look on your face if you don't even know what you're saying? He said, I don't know. And I said, well, I'll tell you what it means. It means stand up. We're going to read the gospel. It's just an instruction to people. In case you're sitting, we should stand because we're going to read the gospel. Okay? He's like, oh. I'm like, so it's an instruction and you don't know what it means. He goes, no. I go, it's weird, huh? He goes, yeah. And then I said, do you think the people know what you're saying to them? He goes, no, they have no idea. I go, so let me get this right. You're giving them you're telling them to stand, but you're going to tell them in a way they don't understand. Weird, huh? He goes, yeah, weird. And I go, well, let me ask you another question. How do you say that in Coptic? And he goes, well, that is Coptic. And I said, no, it's Greek. It used to be in Coptic. You know why they changed it? Because the people didn't understand the Coptic. Everyone spoke Greek. So they're like, well, that's stupid. We can't give them an instruction in Coptic. We got to say it in Greek. That's the language people understand. So they changed it to Greek so that people could understand the Greek. And you're still saying it in Greek. Right? He goes, wow, that's really jacked up. I'm like, it is. It gets worse. That sentence is not even current Greek. It's ancient Greek. So if the church was full of Greek people, they still wouldn't understand that sentence. So in fact, there's no one alive on earth today who understands what you just said. And we're still saying it. And we think we're being what? Traditional. Right? In fact, if you want to be really traditional, it's hot. If you want to be...
You're like, this paper
if you want to be... It's a hot building. If you want to be truly traditional, what would you do? you would do what they did. And what did they do? Well, they saw that no one understood the Coptic, so they changed it to Greek, and I say it in a language people understand. That's being traditional, right? So you aren't being traditional. What you're being is repetitive, right? You're imitating, okay? And that's a difference, right? So the spirit of the church isn't about, well, that's the language I learned it in, that's not our church, right? That's a different place, okay? Continue. Such a theology may prove incapable of recognizing the issues of its own age while it presents yesterday's arguments to confront new heresies, right? And so we have to be careful that we can think about new issues, right? And not say the old stuff, right? Because I'm sure if St. Athanasius and St. Cyril and all of these guys were here today and they hear us quoting them about an argument they had in the year 325, they'd be like, well, that argument's settled, right? We talked about that. It's over. You guys have other problems. Are you guys talking about your problems? No, we're talking about the 325 problems. Yeah, but those problems are no longer problems, right? There's very few people in Christianity that still believe that Christ isn't divine, other than like the Seventh-day Adventists and the Mormons. But everyone else doesn't think that, right? So why are we still focusing on those old problems? So the issues we have, LGBTQ, the purpose of voting, backing of political candidates by the church, right? These are issues we have to think about, and you guys have to think about, right? Like something like voting, for example. How are you supposed to vote? Voting is new. Like voting is the concept. Oh, you're not, no, I need the fan. This is all I need. Thank you.
Are you sure?
Yeah, but if you want to give me a thing of water, that would be great. Because
I thought that was true.
No, it's disgusting. I'm not touching it. Like voting, yeah, I'm fine. Voting is a 200-year-old concept, right? Thank you very much, right? In the old days, you had an emperor, you had a king, you had a dictator. If you disagreed with him, he killed you, right? Simple. This whole people vote, it's weird. The church has never addressed this. Jesus didn't, the Bible didn't address it, the fathers don't address it. It's a new thing, right? So how are you supposed to vote? A lot of people say, well, you vote your conscience, you vote morality, you vote with Jesus, you vote Christianity, you vote with the church. Do you? I don't know. We haven't had that discussion. We haven't had that debate. Is that the purpose of voting? Is my job as a Christian to use the laws of the country to make everyone else a Christian? Or worse, not even make them a Christian, make them act like a Christian. Like if it's not okay for me, I'm going to pass a law and make it not okay for you either, because I'm a Christian. Is that the purpose of voting? Be louder. So, hate is my love language. So you guys should know that. I use hate as my expression. Okay, so these are the things we have to think about. These are the things we have to think about. So I did that.
It's pretty silent.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing how you can do that.
You really loud.
All right. Right. So these are the issues you guys have to address, right? And I think a lot of us we show up to this country, as immigrants. Everyone says, "Oh, the Republicans are the party of Jesus." Everyone goes, "Okay," and then they all vote for Republican. If you're a real Christian, you vote Republican, right? And we've all just been fed that, right? And I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure any political party, Democrats or Republicans, has a lock on God, right? And I don't think any political party is consistently takes a position that a moral person would take, right? I mean, even, the Democrats are very big on environment. Environment is a very Christian issue, right? We're called to be stewards of the earth, right? Democrats are very big on poor people. We're supposed to help poor people, right? So it's not clear to me that one party has all the answers, right? And nor should any party have all the answers. And should a church back a party or back a politician? In my opinion, the answer is no, ever. We should never talk politics in the church, ever. Right? In fact, Suppleman said that today at the clergy meeting. He said politics and capitalism should not enter the churches, right? And we got both of those in spades, right? And we have to be careful, like, what are we doing? And why are we doing that? Okay. Abortion, so on and so forth. He says, in fact, dead traditionalism cannot be truly traditional. It is an essential characteristic of patristic theology that it was able to face the challenges of its own time while remaining consistent with the original apostolic Orthodox faith, right? So again, being dead isn't being traditional. Simply repeating what other people said is not being traditional, and it's inconsistent with their spirit, the fathers. Thus, simply to repeat what the fathers said is to be unfaithful to their spirit and to the intention embodied in their theology. The fathers, if you actually read the fathers, are very dynamic, open-minded people. Like crazy dynamic, open-minded. Like St. Basil was basically, the patron saint of this church was basically a socialist. He said, if you have 2 coats, you have one too many, right? You should give that other coat to your brother. How dare you have 2 coats and someone is cold outside in the street? It's pretty powerful, right? So these guys are not what we think, right? And the fathers, these guys were, some of them were personalities, right? These guys got exiled. They got excommunicated by the church. Like St. John Chrysostom was excommunicated, right? For being outspoken and saying stuff that nobody would want to say, right? So don't think of the fathers that like they've been portrayed in some places, right? They're actually not like that at all. They're very open-minded and dynamic. I'll skip the case of Reb Salim. If Noah was here, I would have said it, but...
Wait, say it. I don't say it.
No, I can say it, doesn't matter. There's a hymn called Reb Salim. You guys know it, Tazbiha? Okay. And what do you know about Reb Salim?
Sarkis made it, and it rhymes.
It rhymes. Very good, right? So...
Oh, and it spells his name.
Does it? I don't think it's supposed to.
Or is that a different one?
Okay. So Arib Salim is a hymn, and it basically, if you read the hymn, first of all, it rhymes, okay? And then the second thing, it goes alpha, beta, gamma, delta, right? So it's alphabetical order, right? So, and a guy named Sarkis wrote it, and he put his own name in it, which is just kind of weird, right? So if Sarkis was around, and so what do? We take Arib Salim, and the first thing we do is we say it the way we said it in Coptic, right? And then he's like, well, you don't understand what you're saying. So why are you saying it that way? First question. And then we go, okay, we'll translate it. And he goes, yeah, but now it doesn't rhyme, bro. Okay, the cool part was it rhymed. And it was alphabetical order. It's no longer alphabetical order. So if I want to be truly traditional, what should I do? I should write a hymn that rhymes and is in alphabetical order. That's what he did, isn't it? Right? Not just simply repeat and imitate what he did, but do what he did. Does that make sense? Right? Not just say the same thing he said. Okay? And so sometimes we mistake those two things, right? I want to be really traditional. I'll say the same thing he said, but that's not what he did, right? Do what he did.
You can't just make a new hymn.
Of course you can. We make new hymns all the time. In fact, most of the very traditional hymns we think are very traditional, we're talking 100 years. So a lot of what we have in the church is in the last few hundred years. A lot. Right? What?
Sophia's just so shocked.
She is. All right, so
He's basically telling you your whole life is a lie.
yeah.
She's gonna write it to him now.
She's typing now. Something that rhymes.
Don't forget your first name, like Sophia.
Don't tell Noah that he can put his name in the song.
Yeah, the Noah ode. All right, so I'll go to the second one. It says, we must imitate their constant effort to understand their contemporaries and use words and concepts which could truly reach the minds of the listeners, right? So one of the things that the church has to do is it has to understand the society in which we live. It can't simply condemn the society in which we live and say, oh, those people are bad. They're Americans. It's not that simple, right? And that's not what the church fathers did. In fact, when you read the church fathers, they often quote people who were writing in those times. They're very well read. They knew what was happening in politics. They knew what was happening in the literature. They knew what's happening in poetry. And they could relate to those pieces, right? And use that in their message, right? So simply dismissing the culture as bad is also not traditional to the church. Case of Festive of Oro. This will be my last example, right? The hymn of Oro Faraihi, like the festive of Oro, is we say this in the feast when we walk in. This tune, as some of you may know, is what? Where did we get this tune from? It's Pharaonic, right? It's from the time of the pharaohs, right? So let me use another word instead of pharaonic. It's pagan, right? The pharaohs were pagans. They believed in man gods. Right? So imagine how open-minded the church is, right? It shows up and they go, hey, okay, so here's you guys doing all these pagan things. That's nice. Love the tune. Let's get rid of the Pharaoh is God stuff and let's put in King of Peace, right? But we're going to keep the same pagan song you're singing. Wow. That's pretty open-minded, isn't it? That's Christianity, right? That's being traditional. And if I want to be traditional, I should do the same thing they did. Instead, I want to imitate and say, I'm going to sing the same pharaonic tune. But you're not pharaonic. Yeah, but people were. So but they're dead. And you're alive. And you need to worship the living God with your life, right? Not create a museum and preserve something that happened 2,000 years ago, right? So we have to think about what it means to be alive as a church versus the stated objective of some churches is preserving tradition. We are here to preserve the tradition. That is not an objective of Christianity. Find me one father, and I'm going to say one father, who says something like that, right? It doesn't say live a life with God, live a life with Christ, love your neighbor, be devoted to other people, forgive other people, and says make sure you do exactly what the other people did. Do it just like they did it. Yes.
So I have two questions. One, St. Paul wrote to a lot of churches saying like to practice the things that the church was doing because it's like one of the arguments for churches that aren't as traditional because they're not like holding communion and certain things like that and they're like, oh, it's not in the Bible. But that was one thing is like, well, he did say, I mean, maybe not preserve because he's not thinking long term, maybe he's saying like, do what the church is doing, be congruent, but also I'm a little confused on the argument because we say it in context. So I'm asking, like, we're preserving it.
Well, okay, so I think you're mixing a couple of things, right? Christ said, do this in remembrance of me. He ordered them to continue the Eucharist, right? And from the earliest days of the church, the Eucharist is ordered to be, like, the Eucharist isn't important. The Eucharist is everything in the church, right?
And not just that, but, yeah.
Yeah, but let's just take that example, right? But do I have to sing that tune in the Eucharist, right? Do I have to say it this way? Well, if I go through history, there's 500 different ways it was done, all of them acceptable by the church, right? So what you don't want to lock in, you want to be able to sift through the real deal versus the stuff on the outside. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I understand the argument of why we don't use, like, contemporary music, but, like, I mean, with the argument you're saying is, at least what I'm getting is you could take a song like Happy Birthday or something and adapt it to Christianity and make that a hymn, but we don't do that. So
Yeah, so that's a very good question, right? And something the church is going to grapple with, right? Because like in Egypt, a lot of if you listen to Egyptian taratil, they're very Arab sounding, right? Very Middle Eastern. They have oud, right? And ding, 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 right? And they're, and that's great, right? Because that's their culture, right? That's the kind of music they like. Even the songs have a certain rhythm to them and they're set a certain way. And if you like Arabic, right, and Arabic music and Arab culture, it's really nice. And I actually love them, okay? But of course, if I'm in this culture, then I would just use different culture, right? And I would sing songs that don't sound Arab, right? Like, hey, how you doing?
He came in knowing.
He came in to eat first. See, like, this is how much he cares. I'll go to the food first, and then I'll listen, right? But so now, the question is like, okay, I can play oud, but can I play guitar? But that's a different instrument, right? So these are all things we have to, as a church, kind of grapple with, right, over time. And lots of churches have innovated, and there's lots of churches in Egypt that are innovating inside the liturgy, right? And bless you, and creating new different ways to approach, music, right? But it's a tough issue, right? Because what's also bound up in the issue isn't just being culturally appropriate, right? But being spiritually appropriate, right? And theologically appropriate, right? So, and there's a spiritual aspect. There's a spiritual cadence to the spiritual life, and spiritual life and Orthodox spiritual life is less emotional than contemporary American spiritual life, for example, right? So you have to be careful. Like, I can't just adapt emotion, for example, or I can't just adapt a contemporary instrument because it is contemporary, right, or culturally appropriate, right? I have to mix and match several things, and that takes a long time, right? Because we all bump our heads against it. One person does it, everyone's like, heretic, shoot him in the face, and then people start to like it, and then someone says, yeah, but this isn't appropriate, and then and then we kind of tussle our way into what works and what doesn't, right? And it's same with all these issues. Like, I mean, politics in the church, right? We've been in America 50 years, right? And everyone's arguing over how to vote and what you should vote for. And there's some clergy who, like, from the pulpit say, you got to vote for these people and these propositions and these things. If you are a true Christian, this is what you do, right? And there are other clergy who don't hold that position at all, right? And say, that's politics. That stays out there, right? This is a hospital for broken people. This is not a place to push political ideology or push politicians right? So people are, fighting with, not fighting, they're figuring it out, right? We're bumping up against each other, figuring this out. Yeah.
How do you differentiate hymns from just singing Christian songs? Like other
Well, I mean, the word hymn is basically a song, right? So, I mean, what we're talking about is the age of the song, right? And whether or not it's been appropriated into the liturgy or not, right? And so where a lot of innovation occurs is at the tails of the liturgy, right? So a lot of innovations occurred during communion hymns, right? So all kinds of things are said during communion. And then a lot of innovation occurred historically before the Eid, for example. There's matins lasts an hour and a half, right? All these hymns are there. They all kind of got shoved into matins, right? Like, you guys want to say stuff, knock yourself out, go to matins and do stuff, right? Or do it during communion. And we've held closed the middle part, right? To some level. And again, this is very difficult, questions, right? Because, it's about what is spiritually edifying, what's culturally appropriate, and what's theologically correct, right? And that should be the trifecta, and that should be my focus. It should be a Christ-centered focus with Orthodox theology, Orthodox spirituality, right? And a cultural appropriateness. Make sense?
Because I feel like, I don't know, some spiritual songs are great, but they're not super, theologically sound. And even some Teranim,
But don't we have the Enkiak stuff that's
But
not...
that-
Yeah, the stuff in Kek some of it needs to be burned. Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, and there's a lot of people who are making these points. I mean, and even there's some hymns that they're actually in Greek. I don't want to get into it, right? But even if you look at the translation, it isn't actually the real translation, and the translation itself is kind of gibberish, right? So there's a lot of things we have to focus on, but I think we have differing objectives, right? There are a lot of people like, no, we have to preserve it, and so it's very hard to have a discussion with that kind of person, right? Because that they have one objective, like do what was said yesterday, right? And that's it. And then there's some people who are like, well, this song really moves me. Well, is that the measure either, right? And so we have to have an honest discussion. But there's lots of competing forces, Yeah.
Two questions. So, do you think that the church is moving in that direction, or are you saying more that it's stagnating and you want it to move in this direction?
No, I think the church is actually moving quickly in that direction. and actually the Coptic Church in America, for all its woes, has done a remarkable job of pivoting, right? And one of the reasons why is because we actually have a history of being very good at pivoting, right? So, the church in Alexandria was a Hellenistic city, ancient Greek, right? And so the transition to Coptic wasn't easy, right? And so you have this hodgepodge mix that we have in the liturgy, right, where some responses are Greek, some responses are Coptic, right, and the church was trying to transition from one to the next, right, and then when Arabic came along, that was a huge fight, right? I mean, it took several centuries for the church to finally say, yeah, we're going to pray in Arabic, right, because they're like, this is the language of Islam, this is the language of our conquerors, this is the language of the devil. How could we, it's like, but that's what everyone speaks. And for 3 centuries, they fought about this, right? So we did a pretty good job switching to English fairly quickly, right? Because I think we had gone through these battles. Whereas actually some of the other churches, the Russians, the Greeks, much, much slower transition than us, right? I mean, and they held on to the bitter end, and what you're seeing, all these statistics about, some of the Eastern Orthodox churches that are very culturally focused, like the Greek church, very focused on being Greek. Now all the 5th, 6th century kids are like, we're not Greek, right? And their whole identity is being Greek. I'm not coming to the church. I'm not Greek. It's done, right? And so they took longer to make that transition than we did. So we actually had their experience to guide. So I think the Coptic Church is doing okay as far as making that move. But, we still have to keep our eye on the prize, right?
I always found it more fascinating that half of our stuff is in Greek. I'm sorry, ancient Greek, but we're not even in communion with the Greek Orthodox.
Yeah. But I mean, that's because Alexandria was a Hellenistic,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, okay, so we'll continue. True tradition is always a living tradition. It changes while always remaining the same, right? So these are the kinds of ways we should be thinking about the tradition. It changes because it faces different situations, not because its essential content is modified. This content is not an abstract proposition. It is the living Christ himself who said, I am the truth, right? So, I was actually talking with some priests today, and some of you guys may know Abuna Loa, right? Abuna Loa from Torrance, right? So, those of you who don't know him, he passed away like a year or two ago, and he's a legend. He's a giant in the church, right? He's, probably a living saint, right? And what you don't know about him, right, is his sermons, if you listen to them, are very, if you go on my phone, there's only 2 people I listen to, Abuna Loa and Abuna Dud Lamay, right? And so I listen to him all the time. And his sermons are very uplifting. They're very spiritual. They're very Christ-focused. They're very hopeful and beautiful, right? And you wouldn't think that because, you think he's this old, staunch, traditional guy. But he's like that, right? And every once in a while, I'll give a talk, and it is a straight-up plagiarized talk from Abuna Loa, right? I mean, I literally listen to a sermon, and I just type, and I hit pause, and I type, and I hit pause, and then I read the thing. I mean, I've given talks like that, right? You guys see me hold a piece of paper? That's what I'm doing, okay? And I've had people say, hey, Archie, that's a little radical, don't you think? That's a little, too whatever. And I'm like, this is quoted from Abuna Loa, right? And the reason, right, it sounds different, right? Because it's so hopeful and Christ-focused, right? And one of the beautiful things in this quote is, it changes while always remaining the same. It changes because it faces different situations, not because its essential content is modified, right? So I can give the same thing he said, but I can give you a modern example, right? But it's the same thing. So anyway, okay, I'll move on. I won't talk about this. This is us. Does anyone know what this is? Okay, where is it? Where's Hatshepsut?
Egypt.
Duh.
Luxor.
Okay, and
Luxor?
and where's this? Which temple are we in front of? Valley of the Queens.
Yeah. What's Nefertiti?
No, Hatshepsut.
Okay. So anyway, all right. So I'll skip this. Okay. Third approach, apolitically. So we talked about biblically and what that meant. We said it's not that meme of throwing all the verses at people. We talked about traditionally, and we said that doesn't mean imitation. And the last thing I want to talk about is apolitically. Look at this quote by Mother Teresa, right? She says, "Do not wait for leaders, do it person to person." This is so important. Laws don't change anybody, right? Laws don't make... Laws...
Okay, to the
It's the dog.
Huh? What did she say? What did he say?
it was his feet and mine.
The only change we're going to make with people is not passing a law that says you have to act like this, right? It's about person to person, and that's the way Christ did it, you know. And in fact, when they try to rope Christ into an argument and say, "Hey, what do you think about another country coming into this country, dominating it with violence, putting soldiers on the ground in a foreign country, and then extracting taxes from those people at a rate that bankrupts them and drives them to homelessness and drives them into poverty? What do you think of all that? Is that right? Is it okay for Russia to invade Ukraine?" And what did Jesus say? "My kingdom is not of this world." Wrong kingdom, right? I'm not here to solve political problems. You guys will be fighting like this for the next 10,000 years. Right? So even though it seemed like this moral issue that we should be addressing, and is it okay for the Roman Empire to give unto Caesar what's Caesar's, right? So that's not the work of the church, being political. Okay, so that's not to say that as individuals we shouldn't have political points of view or being politically active. You're absolutely allowed and encouraged to be a citizen of this country and to be active politically if that's what you so choose. But the church needs to be careful, and careful is an understatement, when involving itself in politics and with politicians to change local laws to fit church principles, right? We can't be trying to influence the government. And we have to start thinking about what the laws are there for, right? Are laws there for morality? Do you derive your morality from the law? Is that where morality comes from, right? I mean, if you think about the law, you brought your dog? It's a cute dog.
He's so adorable.
If you derive your law you derive your morality from the law, you think about like what the law allows you to do, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. The laws allow us to do a lot of things, right? I can hate my neighbor under the law, right? But I can't, as long as there's no assault or battery, I can hate your guts, right? I can judge you, right? I can sleep with as many people as I want as long as I'm over 18. I can get drunk every single day. I can be addicted to anything I want, right? As long as I don't impose a hazard on other people, right? Laws aren't there to make me good. Laws say I can get divorced. Laws say I can commit adultery. Laws say a lot of things, right? So that's not the point of the law. Parishioners also need to have a discussion on how we think about voting and what's our objective in voting. We also need to be careful that politics and other issues don't cloud our thinking on spiritual matters. And the point I want to make here, and the one I always think about, is I think about this in terms of the LGBTQ issue, right? So we have politics in this issue, right? We have people, politicians wanting gay marriage, right? And then people have very strong opinions about gay marriage. Should they be allowed? Not blah, blah, blah. Right? What should the laws say? Should you be able to inherit? Should you be able to have medical treatment? That's an issue, but that's not the issue of the church. That's the issue of politicians, right? And then there's curriculum in the schools. You know, should we be teaching kids about this stuff? What age should we be teaching it? How explicitly should we be teaching it? That's an issue, but that's for the school board and the curriculum of the school board, right? And if you want to go to the PTA meeting and you want to fight that, or you want to get on the education curriculum, knock yourself out, right? But is that a church issue? I don't know. And then there's the whole transgender, changing your sex, you know, getting hormone blockers, right? And stopping puberty and transitioning from a male to a female or whatever, right? That's a medical issue, right? Is that medical malpractice to have a 14-year-old decide if they want to change gender? Probably, right? But that's, again, not the issue of the church. So we have to think about issues. We can't let politics cloud our issue that this is a hospital, and this hospital is open to anyone who wants to come in.
But isn't there an objective truth that has has to be talked about somewhere.
Of course.
That's if sin is a wound and that's a sin. And the church is a hospital, doesn't that have to be talked about?
Yeah. So if someone comes into the hospital and you say you're not actually sick, then you're lying to them, right? That's medical malpractice of the church. So no one's saying tell them to do that. That's not what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is we can't let my anger with the what they're teaching the kids affect when someone gay comes into the church and make me hate him. He's a 14-year-old boy who's scared, right? That's a person. And there's a difference, right? So oftentimes when you enter these discussions, especially on this issue, you start talking about, well, we have to love people, which I don't think is a controversial topic. And then people go, you know what they're teaching the kids in the schools? And I'm like, oh, you want to talk about a different subject? Okay, you want to talk about that subject? I'm talking about someone who walks in the church who's struggling with their sexual identity, who's scared to death that when their dad finds out, he will kill him, and his parents will ostracize him, he'll lose his friends, he'll lose his church. That's someone I'm really worried about. And you're telling me, you know what they're teaching the kids in the schools? Right? So we have to be careful we don't cloud our thinking because of stuff outside. This place is not that. This place is a hospital open for everybody. And everyone we see, we give them the full love of God. Right? And love is the only thing that changes anybody. Not throwing laws at people. Make sense? So this is from 130 AD, the epistle of Mathesis the Diagnostus, whoever that is. Christians are not distinguished from the rest of humanity by country, language, or custom. For nowhere do they live in cities of their own, nor do they speak some unusual dialect, nor do they practice an eccentric way of life. They live in their own countries, but only as non-residents. They marry like everyone else and have children, but they do not expose their offspring. They share their food, but not their wives. They live on earth, but their citizenship is in heaven. They obey the established laws. Indeed, in their private lives, they transcend the laws. They love everyone, and by everyone they are persecuted. So what this is basically saying is we live on earth, but we're not on earth. This isn't our home. This isn't our place, right? Our objective isn't to make earth heaven. That's not going to happen. In the world, you will have tribulation. This place is a broken place. And we're not going to change it by laws, by politics, by winning at every proposition. We change it person to person. We become the light of Christ by absorbing him, and then we share that light with other people. I don't need to change everybody. I just need to change the person in front of me. And then I'll end with this quote. For Christians above all men are forbidden to correct the stumblings of sinners by force. This is important. This is St. John Chrysostom. It is necessary to make a man better, not by force, but by persuasion. And this is something we don't really do well. We do a lot of force. Force fast, force coming, force this, force that. And that's just behavior modification. So he continues, we neither have authority granted us by the law to restrain sinners. And look at this is prophetic. He's talking about the United States. Nor if it were, should we know how to use it. So if we did have authority granted to us by law to restrain sinners, we would not know how to use that authority. He's talking about America, right? That's not something we know how to do, right? Since God knows the crown, God gives the crown to those who are kept from evil, not by force, but by choice, right? Forcing someone to be moral, then they're not moral, right? If you put a gun to my head and say, don't do this, I won't do it, but it's not because I'm good. It's not because I love Jesus. It's not because I'm trying to be a good person. It's I don't want to go to jail. I don't get my head blown off, right? So if you force me to do something, okay, I'll do it, but you didn't get me, my heart, I mean, the way I always think about it, right, is if I hold a big knife in front of you and I said, you have to do this or I'm going to stab you, you're going to do it, right? Now, if I hold this knife up and I say, now love me, I'm not going to love you, right? So Christianity can't be like that. If you don't do this thing, I'm going to send you to hell. Okay, I'll do it. Now love me. Huh? How's that going to work? Make sense? All right. Anybody have any other questions, comments? I have more slides, but I'm going to stop. I have a really funny political slide that I want to show you guys. I'll show you. All right, you guys want to watch this?
Another election, another voting day, whatever it takes under your kingdom, oh God, to bring it all in line. Bring it all in line. Bring it all in line with the will of God. Strike and 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 strike. For every enemy that is aligned against you, let there be that we would strike the ground. You will give us victory, God. I hear a sound of abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of shouting and singing. I hear a sound of victory.
I think we've got our new
I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done.
We must not let the devil have the inheritance of this country. The angel of the Lord is going to go forth for America. Why? Because the president can't fight now. You get what I'm saying? He can't do it. So the Lord is sending his angel.
We release and commission and dispatch the angels into that place in Pennsylvania and in Michigan, Lord, and in all these states, and secure that election process.
Oh, she's still in the corners of heaven, victory, victory, victory. For angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now.
Paula White King, that woman has spiritual insight.
The angels have even dispatched from Africa right now. Africa right now. Africa right now. From Africa right now. They're coming here. They're coming here. In the name of Jesus. From South America. They're coming here. They're coming here. They're coming here. They're coming here. From Africa. From South America. Angelic forces. Angelic reinforcements. Angelic reinforcements.
What is you anyways? Sounds like it's in here though.
And the Lord says, Son of man, prophesy unto Wisconsin that it will go red for Trump. Prophesy unto Michigan that it will go red for Trump. Prophesy unto Pennsylvania that it goes red for Trump. Prophesy that it goes red for Trump. Prophesy unto Georgia that it goes red for Trump. Prophesy unto Nevada that it goes red for Trump. Prophesy that the media will cancel the assignment to call the election.
The Fox News decision desk can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden will win Pennsylvania and Nevada, putting in over the 270 electoral votes he needs to become the 46th president of the United States.
So we have to be very careful, right? So, this is what happens when angels are being released for Nevada to go red. Our kingdom is not of this world, right? And once we start mixing these two things, it's a dangerous place, right? And everyone just sort of loses their mind. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of money. Whenever power and money enter the church, politics enters the church, corruption follows immediately, right? And this is the history we've seen through centuries. Power is not good for the church. What's really good for the church? Persecution. Best thing ever, right? When the church is persecuted, it's never stronger than when it's persecuted. Right? So again, we have to be careful and thoughtful about these things and not just jump into them without, being, considerate. Right? Anyway, any other questions, comments? I just want to show you the video. That was funny. It gets worse.
Are we gonna start the talk now?
Can you send the video?
I got it on YouTube. Oh my God, there's so many of these videos out there. Like I had to trim this one. Like it was so long and it had so much stuff. And it's just me. Other thoughts? All right, I went too long. And glory be to God forever. Amen. Thanks for having me. picture, yes. Let's do picture. You gotta be in it, Noah.
I'm allergic.